It's Saturday, March 7th, and once again, we have a really large area which could see severe weather today. And this is, of course, going to include all hazards. So that's going to be mostly wind, some hail, and then also some tornadoes. As you can probably tell, these are going to be split up quite a bit more. Hail's mostly going to be in Texas. Tornadoes, we're going to have two main hot spots. One is going to be down in the Mississippi River Valley, one's going to be up in the northeast to Ohio River Valley, and then our wind risk is going to pretty much cover those same areas, except there's just a widespread conditional risk, which spans all the way from Texas, kind of arcing up until the Great Lakes region. And with those hazards, I think we're not really going to see super large hail today, probably nothing over 1.5 inches to 2 inches. I don't really think we're going to see a big threat for strong tornadoes today. I don't even really think there is that much of a threat for strong tornadoes. In winds, I don't really think we're going to see anything much over 65 miles an hour. But this is going to start with some of the stuff from yesterday's pretty big risk. We did see a couple of strong tornadoes come out of that, but the main thing is going to be a cold front. There's not really that much to it, so we're not really worried about storms actually popping up, and the models are finally agreeing for once. The convective allowing models have been pretty bad the past couple of days, but luckily there's not much to this setup with a dry line or synoptic stuff from 500 millibars. It's just going to be a straight up cold front and a line of thunderstorms. Now, the first thing is we're going to have this little area of warm air advection. We did see this pop off some storms yesterday, and it looks like this is going to continue to be the hot spot probably around the very early morning hours. This would be around 2-3 a.m. We're going to see a line of thunderstorms pop up in parts of northeastern Texas, trail off into far western Arkansas, far eastern Oklahoma. These could actually have the potential to bring damaging winds, tornadoes, and hail. It doesn't look like that's going to be that likely though, because our bulk organizing shear is going to be pretty low. Definitely would want to watch out for these though, in case anything crazy were going to happen. But it looks like with our wind profile, we have a little bit of a S curve, so that's going to hurt these in organizing, and also our bulk shear isn't really good enough for them to organize. So it looks like they're just going to cluster out, but their main role is going to be crashing into our main line of thunderstorms, which looks like our main line along our cold front's probably going to really dig in around sunrise when that convergence kicks up a little bit more. And then also when these kind of clusters from that warmer advection crash into it, that's when we're really going to start to see that biggest threat for damaging winds and hail pop up. I think probably around 15Z. So this would be about 8-9 in the morning. This is going to be our first peak in tornado activity. And I think this is really going to last from the far northeastern corner of Texas going all the way up to the Tennessee-Kentucky border, maybe into very South Kentucky there. And this is really going to last in this region. Of course, that risk of tornadoes is going to weaken a little bit, but the potential for tornadoes is probably going to last until probably the late afternoon. Of course, we can see back here in parts of Texas, we're seeing a semi-discrete mode. There's going to be a lot of cape and a lot more bulk shear, and that's why this is going to be primarily for hail, maybe hailstones around 2 inches. But with our main line, I'm not expecting to see anything much over 1.5, if anything. And that's really going to be it for this line. Eventually, as we go into the night hours, we see a couple of kind of stronger thunderstorms actually pop up in Texas. These are mostly going to be high elevated hailers with that potential for some damaging winds, of course, but all of this stuff after sunset. Normally we do see kind of a resurgence with a low level jet close to sunset. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case here for this line, and these are mostly just going to become rainmakers and go off into the Gulf. And that's really going to be all we're going to see from this cold front down here in the southeast. But as we go up towards the northeast, we're going to see a couple of things that are different. I don't really think these storms are going to get their act together until a little bit later in the day, probably closer to lunchtime. This would be around 1 p.m. And what we're going to see up here is actually one of the other areas, which I think is going to have pretty decent tornado potential and also damaging wind potential right up here in this corridor. And this potential is probably going to last until about sunset and then it's going to die off. So what are the main factors with this? Let's just look at our SIG tornado parameter, and you can kind of see right here what's going on. We have a elevated area of SIG tornado parameter up into far western Pennsylvania. Definitely think we could see the potential for a couple of tornadoes out here along our line. And back down here in the southern Great Plains, you can definitely see how that significant tornado parameter gets a lot less favorable as we go into the day. But when we're kind of at what I think is going to be the peak, we see a couple of really favorable pockets around 1 to 2. And then this, of course, is going to be when all of those storms are going to be crashing into that line, kind of interacting with it. And this is why I think we could see a couple of spin ups during this time. Also, another thing to note is that SIG tornado parameter is quite a bit less as we go into Texas. And that's really why we're not going to see as much. This is also the supercell composite. And just looking at this with those warm air advection cells and the very, very early morning hours, definitely a peak of supercell composite right here from some warm air advection. I think those will have a decent chance of forming. Even the NAM kind of agrees with that. So that's always a good sign. Those are going to crash in that line. Really solid supercell composite throughout the day. The main thing here is that as we go further into today, our shear is going to get worse, but our cape and our 3 cape is going to get much better. So in the early morning hours, we see a little bit of a plume right here that looks to be around 2000. But as we go later in today, we're reaching into the mid 2000s. And even in some areas, we might even reach 3000 cape. So there's that. And then if we go back up to the mid-Atlantic and kind of northeastern sector, you can just see a plume of much more favorable cape over 1000 right up here in our main risk area. Definitely why there's a higher chance of seeing tornadoes and damaging winds there. So this would be from the first peak in tornado activity, probably around 8, 9, 10 a.m. in the morning. And this is what we're working with. Definitely not the worst thermodynamic profile I've ever seen. Definitely could be a little bit more dry air kind of working in to help with that threat of damaging winds. But the main things are that 70 degrees over 67 degree dew point. That's going to be more than enough moisture for these storms to work with. These storms are going to be surface based. We're seeing a little bit of turning with height in our winds. 3 cape isn't that bad, 62. And then our cape is going to be probably around 1500 during this time. This is going to be enough for some strong thunderstorms at the minimum, and definitely potentially some damaging winds just off those thermos alone. Now looking at our hodograph, seeing pretty favorable turning. This looks fairly streamwise in the first 2 kilometers. Now as we go up further into the mid and upper levels, definitely a different story, but this is just going to be for a QOCS threat along a line of thunderstorms that's going to really be shot up by that cold front. So we don't really need our upper and mid-level winds to be that good, as long as our effective inflow, which is the first 2 kilometers right here, is really spinny, and we have some strong low-level shear, which is what we're seeing here, close to 300 SRH and close to 40 knots of low-level shear. I think that chance of tornadoes is going to be pretty decent right there. One thing to note right here, though, is that our bulk shear is only going to be 30 knots, maybe probably 25 to 30 knots. We'd like it to be closer to 30 knots for that risk of supercells to be bolstered. But once again, this is just for a line of thunderstorms along a cold front. So this isn't really something that needs to be that big of a factor for these storms to still perform in a way. And now we're switching gears, going up to our northeastern risk area. Up here, we're seeing 63 over 60. Not bad, especially that far northeast. I think 60 degree dew points are going to be able to get the job done. The main thing up here, though, is that our 3 cape is going to be really high. In some areas, it's going to be in between 125 to 150. That's going to be really good for stretching that rotation and kind of bolstering that tornado threat. We're seeing our winds turning with height, what looks to be a pretty strong 700 millibar jet up here as well. And it looks like our cape, our mixed level cape, is going to be around 800. So we're seeing cape anywhere from around 750 to 1000 up here. That's going to be pretty solid. And then looking at our shear parameters, really solid across the board, really somewhat streamwise. Not as streamwise as you'd like to see in the lower levels. That could be a little detrimental for a tornado threat, especially if our instability isn't that great. But looking at the bigger picture, we have 300 SRH, 45 knots of low level shear, and then around 50 knots of bulk shear that's going to be working into these storms up here. So overall, I think there's going to be a decent probability for all hazards with these cells in the Northeast as well, and definitely a small tornado threat. Really, the only thing that I can knock on this profile is not a bunch of instability and then this crosswise vorticity in the lowest levels where those tornadoes are going to be. But if those can get figured out, I definitely think there's going to be a decent chance of seeing a couple of tornadoes, damaged winds, and even hail with these because our bulk shear is going to be a bit more.